morning, everybody, and welcome to this episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski. And folks, we have one of the greatest past 30 MPC guests on the show again, and one of the greatest enterprise sellers over at UserGems, Kristen Connor, in a clinic on big deal management, figuring out who your champion is, or if you don't have one, going and finding a better one. Nick, why should people listen?
So there's a common sales advice of, oh, you've got to make sure that you sell in between meetings. And I hear that advice and I think, great, how do I do that? Well, you're in luck because this episode answered that question. Kristen gets into how you can sell in between meetings, the way that you want to be selling, because the way that you sell in between meetings early stage is different than how you sell late. And also she talks about how you can sell to the different power lines in that in between meetings. So if you are looking for a way to juice your pipeline and increase your win rate in between meetings, you might want to listen to this episode. All right, Kristen, welcome back to the show. You may remember that we start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways, so let's get your 3.
So first thing, what we want to do in even our first call with folks is we want to match their urgency, right? And so usually first call has some element of discovery in it. When we go through our questions, we get to the end of the call and we say, hey, Nick, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been great to speak with you. It seems like you're seeing some value in what we do. And I do need to ask, I find people join these calls for one of 3 reasons. Number one is they're in education mode. They're just looking around to see what exists in the market to solve the problem. Second is sometimes people join because this is their biggest problem. They have to solve it. They needed it solved 6 months ago, and they're hoping we can help. And the last one is there's some pain around this. They're interested in solving it, but if they don't solve it in the next 12 months, nothing terrible will happen. I'm just asking, where would you put yourself on that spectrum? And the reason I ask is I never want to be the one to chase anything. So if you are just in education mode, 100% okay.
Beautiful. What's number 2?
So we've matched their urgency. They've opted in. Yes, this is a problem we need to solve 6 months ago. Now we want to use what I call sell betweens. We want to sell between meetings. Sell betweens are that little extra something that we send individually to each person who is on the buying committee before the next meeting. And their job is to compel the person to come to that meeting versus pushing a meeting. So what they need to do is they need to pique curiosity. They need to provide an insight, or they need to create some sort of fear or uncertainty or doubt about their status quo. They do not include a call to action. The only thing is they're keeping us top of mind without us just following up. An example that we talked about that I've sent before at UserGems is a simple picture of a Gartner chart showing that executives make buying decisions in their first 30 days in a role. For UserGems, because they want you to help you find past champions, that tells you, oh God, we should be reaching out to these people much quicker. I just put a picture of the chart and said, this is what Gartner says. Thought it might be interesting for your team to think about first movers advantage. 1 chart, 3 sentences, but it makes them think.
So now I feel compelled to ask about number 3 because you have piqued my curiosity.
Absolutely. Now that we know we have a deal, we have some momentum, we want to identify champions early. It is absolutely true. No champion, no deal. On the flip side of that is, despite how important champions are, there is no enablement on how we develop a champion. So I've come up with 3 concrete ways. We want to develop a champion. It's gradual. We don't ask someone to marry us on the first date. So first thing is, will they work asynchronously of us? After the meeting, will they go get us some data? Will they go to their leadership and ask about how does this stack rank in our priorities? Will they do something apart from a meeting? Number 2 is, will they bring other people to follow-up meetings? Will they say, hey, my boss has to see this? Or, you know what, I'm in sales, but marketing needs to be involved in this. And then third is, do they have some sort of point of view on next steps? It's okay if they don't totally know how to buy in their org, but when we say, hey, typically at this point, A, B, or C happens, they should be able to pick one of those and ideally interject, you know what, in this company, we also have to do a little bit of option D. If they will work asynchronously, if they will bring other people, and if they have some sort of point of view, we can see that we're going to be able to develop them as a champion in the deal.
So, Kristen, I love this concept of sell betweens, which is, to recap for the audience, things that you send one-to-one to
Yep.
different people on the buying committee
Yep.
before the next meeting.
Yep.
First, orient us around like where this happens in your sales cycle. Are you doing this as early as after a first discovery call? Or
Yes.
is this once you get into a big team meeting and you're trying to be multi-threaded and all that stuff? So I'm curious where this actually happens.
For me, this starts at the beginning. We have the first meeting. I send them the follow up to that meeting the first day, and then I'll go in and kick off that sequence. There's usually like a 1 or 2 day gap, but then they'll get that first email or that first LinkedIn message 2 days from that first meeting. I want to be right in there.
Is
That's
this
so
just like a follow-up to the recap email? It sounds like you
No,
might be sending a LinkedIn
definitely.
DM. Talk to me
Yeah.
about the mechanics of that
Mhm.
message.
Yeah, it depends on the capabilities of what you have. But if you have some sort of like sales engagement platform or anything where you can do multi-channel, I love to do multi-channel. So one, it's an email, it is a LinkedIn DM,
Mhm.
it's a voicemail or a little video. I can't tell you how many leaders I've dealt with that their inboxes are a swamp, but if you hit them with a LinkedIn message, they're right on it. Like they don't get as much noise in there or they're hyper focused on it or something. I want to find out what channel is most effective for them. It needs to start very quickly and it goes through contract signing. And actually, then I would have sequences on the backside of contract signing, just like little education things of, hey, at this point people are usually learning to do this, because especially if I'm responsible for growing that account, like we don't want to just sign and be gone. We want to be making sure that they're getting value because we want that account to grow.
So let's make this super tactical. You
Yep.
end the first discovery call. 2 days later, you're sending them a LinkedIn message. You're pulling up your notes from that discovery call. What are you looking to pull out of that discovery call? And you can use a UserGems example or define what UserGems does for the audience if helpful.
What I am looking for in that first message, whether it's an email or a LinkedIn message, is I want to reinforce that this problem is big enough to solve. And I want to use a third party source to do that. Like, God bless marketing, but the stuff we say about ourselves doesn't count. It's not believable. So that's why I mentioned that at UserGems, that first touch was a pullout from a Gartner article. Later in that sequence at UserGems, it was a graph from a McKinsey article and a couple of insights from there. Generally, if you think about things that are well respected sources, Forbes, Harvard Business Review, anything that's specific to your industry, but just somebody else besides us that's saying this is a problem worth solving.
Yeah, this is something I would do all the time when I was selling ERP systems to law firms. Was there was an organization called ILTA, International Legal Technology Association, and I literally never sent any of our marketing case studies because our prospects were lawyers. They did
Yep.
not buy anything that we said. What I did was I like combed through everything that ILTA put out and I found things that supported the value proposition of what I sold. And I shared that with our prospects. And I also shared articles about change management related to implementing one of these things as a way to show, like, hey, there are best practices out there. Because one of the things that I often found, especially late stage in deals, was the biggest thing that kept prospects from moving forward wasn't that they didn't have enough ROI case studies from us, was that they didn't see that there was documented best practices around how to make a big change like that.
What buyers are focused on is risk. And this is so crucial that salespeople like want to avoid the topic of risk because they're like, ooh, like maybe if I don't mention it, they won't be thinking about it. Ridiculous. But at the end of the deal, when something is signed, the risk goes down for the seller. We've brought the deal in. This applies to our quota. This is just the beginning of the risk for the buyer. They have attached their name to something, they have committed dollars to this. In the Challenger research, they talk about the status quo is not considered one person's fault. But if somebody says, hey, we should do this enterprise wide thing, now the solution is attached to somebody's name, right? It is very risky to be a buyer. And so at the end of the sales cycle, what they are worried about is the risk. What if people don't adopt this? What if people hate this? What if the implementation, they say it's 3 months, but what if it's 18 months? So at the end of sales cycle, I have a favorite book on change management that I have individually sent to executive buyers, highlighted. and some of them have formed book clubs around it, and that is what enabled a large purchase, because buyers are experts in how to do their job. They are not experts in how to buy our stuff, and most of the time they're not change management experts either. And anytime you buy software or services, you are messing with someone's process, you are changing their status quo, and they need help figuring out how they're going to do that.
I love how early in the sales cycle, similar to discovery, you're sending things that amplify the problem.
Yep.
Later in the sales cycle, you're sending things that make it easy for them to think about how to roll this out successfully. So you're attaching what you send based on the timing in the sales cycle.
100%.
I want to give you a different lens now. You're middle of the sales cycle.
Yep.
And you're talking to people at, above, below the line, across the line. So you might have a director of sales development, you might have a VP of sales, and then maybe across you have someone on RevOps.
Yep.
How does what you send vary by function and level of altitude in the org?
There are 3 power levels that we need to be thinking about, basically. There's executives, there's managers of end users, and there's end users. And they care about very different things. And sales is always about what's in it for me. End users care about, does this make my day easier or harder? Managers of end users care about, does this help my team with any metric that I am measured on? Productivity, revenue, churn, however the manager is measured, that's what they care about. Will this help my team in this way? And executives care about, will this help us accomplish our goals or mitigate risk? Accomplishing goals looks like market share, looks like increased stock price, looks like first movers advantage. We send the Harvard Business Review articles to them. For the end users, they don't care about market share, or at least not as much as they care about, does this make my day easier or harder? So yes, the sequences or the resources change depending on what level of the org you're in. Is such an important call out, because if you're not matching the level that they are, you might as well not be sending anything.
So to recap, end users care about making their job easier. Managers care about, will this help my team improve a metric that I am measured on? Execs care about big initiatives related to goals or risk mitigation. Examples that you gave included market share, stock price, first mover advantage. What are some other things that you would include in that list of things that execs care about?
Yeah, so those are goal related, right? Which is great. It's always great for us to be attached to an initiative that they care about. It's even better if that initiative has some sort of risk attached to it. So there's this quote from Question-Based Selling, the book by Thomas Fries, that says, more people will run from a German Shepherd than run towards a gold medal, which is a different way of saying people run from pain and they're more motivated by that than they are towards pain. And so the pain messaging is, risk is pain. What email do they never want to receive? Our system is down. Our customers are locked out. So-and-so just had an acquisition that completely changed the market, right? What is the fear? And risks around market share, also risks around compliance, depending on what industry you're in. If regulations change and all of a sudden they're going to face heavy fines for being out of compliance. Also, especially in laggard industries or late stage, like skeptical industries, the risk is, are you missing out on what literally everyone else is doing? So then you start to name when I sold to school districts, you can't get much more skeptical late stage laggard than like school districts. And so I would name off all of the districts around them that were using this, because it's like, oh God, what am I missing? How are we not doing this? And like the risk that they're falling behind.
How do you walk the line between underscoring how important this problem is versus leaning too hard into FUD and having your prospect feel like, come on, I feel like you're trying to scare me into the sales motion? I think if I was selling cybersecurity and I was sending over stats about percentage of cyber vulnerabilities and attacks and stuff like that, it might come off as too fuddy per se.
Yeah.
So how do you walk that line?
Cyber is a good example. And I think like those folks are already afraid, right? Lots of Fins customers, banks and insurance companies, those are industries like built on risk. They're already afraid. So the fear may not be the right thing. The insight may be the right thing. And the insight may be, hey, do you know this thing is happening in the market that you might be missing out on? You already know there's risk around that. It might be that there's a different capability that certain things have, or companies are bundling these things together with cyber, and that consumers are massively moving towards those because they see some advantage, right? It doesn't have to be this doom. It can be an insight on how their industry is changing. They might be aware of it, but they may not have realized how big that is. When we quantify that, that can sometimes move something from the back burner to the front burner.
How would you articulate that? I'm thinking about you're selling to school districts, and
Mm.
you mentioned one way to give the customer a sense of, hey, everybody else is riding this wave by saying, hey, these 5 school districts, Fairport, Pittsford, Penfield, Brighton, are all using this thing, and you're not. You're the only one in this region that's not. Is there other ways that you are articulating? Are you talking about percentage of companies that have adopted tech like this? Can you give some other examples of how you let them know that they're missing that wave?
When I was selling to school districts, we had this technology inside of Salesforce that would put on a map all of your customers in a given area. And so I would put them on the map, and then all of these little red flags all around them were the districts that were using them. And then I would reference specific names and specific positions, like, hey, John Adams, the HR director over at Poughkeepsie, says that this has made their whatever process 28% faster. And also, I know that they're going to go talk to them because they all know each other. So I love to use a graphic. So there's the map, but I also like using a graphic of all of the people in the space that are current customers of ours. And ideally, there are some competitors of theirs in that. So there can be logos on there that establish credibility. Oh, if IBM uses us, Honeywell uses us, AT&T, whatever. But if there's also logos of their competitors, that can also be a way of underscoring you might need to check this out.
So, Kristen, I want to go all the way back to your first takeaway from the episode, which was matching their urgency and figuring out where they stand.
Mhm.
So, you talked about asking your buyers, hey, are you just in education mode? Did you want to solve this problem yesterday? Do you just want to solve this problem 12 months down the road? What do you do when you get the sense that someone should want to solve this problem? It feels like a big problem, but you get like a lukewarm answer from
Mm.
them. They're like, yeah, I'm just exploring. It doesn't seem like I wanted to solve this yesterday. Maybe in the next couple of quarters. There's no big compelling event to buy UserGems today.
In that case, what I want to do is I want to think about how to use that information that I've gotten on that call during that discovery to do what I call like trading up in the organization. So I either want to go have conversations with your peers, or if you're a director, I want to have some conversations with some managers and some end users. Sometimes end users are the easiest people to get in touch with. And now that I know that this is generally a problem that people have, now I want to ask at different levels of the org, hey, what? I'm curious. Full disclosure, I talked with Armand. I may have a way to help you do your job in XYZ capacity. Honestly, I don't know, but I'm curious if you'd hop on a call with me for 15 minutes. And if it's not worth it, totally fine. Always look for the go-getters, the ambitious ones. They're posting on LinkedIn a lot. If you find at LinkedIn, they came to that company recently, especially if they came from like outside the industry. Like these are people that are like interested and paying attention. But I want to use that information to trade up to find out who's experiencing the problem. And also, I want to know what internal vocabulary are they using? Does this project have a name? Anything important has an internal name. And the more we can use that, the more we sound like an insider and the more trust and credibility we have. So we can go after that. And so then once I understand the pain at different levels, then I want to go to someone above that director and be like, hey, so I talked to 6 of your managers and 12 of your analysts. That here are the takeaways that I got out of what's happening with Project Redo. And here's 3 specific ways I think we can help. Is it worth another conversation?
So I just finished writing one of our newsletters on how to multi-thread, and the three sections were know where you're going, make the ask to get to power, but what if you can't get to power through your champion?
Hmm.
And so you're really talking about going above that director or manager level person and figuring out, hey, Mr. or Mrs. VP, I talked to your entire team. Do all of these concerns combined matter to you? I'm
Mhm.
curious, how do you do that without having the deal blow up in your face and your champion freak out that you went over their head?
I'm going to take issue with the word champion in that scenario. If they
Mm,
will not introduce you to other people in the organization, they are not a champion. And no executive these days makes this, unless you're talking about like owner operators, they don't make decisions in a vacuum. I always say anybody who tells you the way to know that someone is not a decision maker is if they say, I'm the only decision maker. No decision maker says that. They know they need their team, they want their team to sign off on that. Having a first meeting with us does not make someone a champion, it makes them a contact. If we don't know that they're going to be a champion, we need to set up their expectations to understand that we don't view them as a champion. It's great if they offer introductions, but I really don't usually want to ask for those. How I want to position it in coming in is, especially if this is outbound, like we contacted them, right? So if I say, hey, Nick, it's great to talk with you today. Full disclosure, I've been messaging Sally, your VP of people, and Armand, your VP of finance, and David over in operations. Been reaching out to them for several months, and my leadership's been reaching out as well. I'm excited to talk to you today and get your perspective. So, what I've told you nicely is I've been reaching out before you. I don't need you to tell me who is involved in a decision like this in your org. And I've emphasized that I want to get your perspective. I haven't asked for your help. I have said, I want to get your perspective. So it's not like I've said, we're married and we're going to be lock arms and do this thing. It's you are one of many voices that we are speaking to in the organization. And I'm excited to speak with you. And that, by the way, I want to give credit. That is Jamal Reimer's positioning. That is the genius, best way I have ever heard to position that so you don't get stuck just because somebody takes a meeting with you. Because you don't want to create that feeling of going around, but it's on us to set that expectation.
Biggest mistake people make is they book a meeting and then they cancel all of their other sequences or outreach on other prospects. Until a champion is proven to be a champion,
Yeah.
that is still an account that needs to be prospected into. Unless you're in a super tiny SMB sales where it's literally like you got the founder and you know the founder is the one who's making all the decisions. If one person says no, the entire organization of Honeywell or Home Depot did not say no to you.
Correct. And it's generally going to take more than that one first meeting. And if you're in an organization like an AT&T, like a Honeywell, lots of times the other people you need to involve in that deal may not even know each other. So I teamed up with SDRs on this because I was like, you got me this first meeting with this director at Honeywell. It was a great first meeting. We have a second meeting on the books. If they got me a meeting with a VP, and if they could only get paid once as far as one opportunity per account or whatever. So I have gone as far as to kill the first op and let them set up the op again with the second meeting that they're creating, because it's absolutely not fair for them to only get paid once on a deal that needs 7 first meetings. And like, I'm an AE, I don't freaking get paid to set meetings. But if my SDR does, I want to incentivize that. And if they know I've got their back and I am paying attention to how they're incentivized, if I have to share them with 4 other AEs, guess whose stuff they want to work on? If I get the VP in an email sequence and he or she says, yeah, I will actually meet with you, and Nick is my SDR, I have gone as far as to loop in and say, hey, Nick is on my team and he's going to help us find some time. If Nick goes in and finds time on the calendar and books that, and then we'll send him the pre-read or whatever, I'm going to let Nick take credit for booking that meeting. I don't care if I get credit for that or not, unless in general, some AEs are under the gun for AE created pipe, but honestly, I would rather get my hand slapped for not having enough AE created pipe. Nobody gives a shit about AE created pipe as long as the AEs are closing their number.
There was one last takeaway that you had, which ties this all together, which is figuring out if you have a champion early in the sales cycle. So talk to me about, I know the three things that we want are, do they work asynchronously after meeting with you or around meeting with you? Do they bring other people to follow up meetings? And then do they have a point of view on next steps? Can you talk to me about when you start to get those things or when you try to pull those things and vet out your champion in your sales cycle?
I want to start that very early. At the end of that first meeting, once we have established urgency. So for example, I was at UserGems. I did this initial discovery and it was a VP of sales. And I said, okay, hey, 3 reasons people join the call: education mode, needed solved 6 months ago, maybe. He literally is like, this, I have to solve this next quarter. It is the one thing that I have to solve. We laid off all of our SDRs. We need pipeline. I have to solve this. So then I know I need to teach him how to buy in my organization. And so I'm saying to him, okay, typically what happens from here is I either do an in-depth demo for you, or we bring in head of marketing, business development, and sometimes we loop in RevOps because they need to make sure all the trains will run on time and they want to vet the integrations first. Do any of those sound like the right step or something different for your org? It's on me to know who should be involved and to suggest next steps. They should be proactively suggesting things. I have these little kind of truisms in my head, and one of them is buyers do what buyers do, or buyers act like buyers. Like, people are interested. They will not miss it. They won't push meetings. They respond when you send them something. They suggest things you haven't thought of. Like, buyers act like buyers.
A good champion is going to give you the inside scoop on the organization, and a great champion is going to say, hey, you should avoid these people. They're going to get your deal stuck in the mud. This person's a blocker. This person's going to get really pissed off if you say this thing. Procurement is going to want a 20% discount, so leave some meat on the bone. They're the ones who are telling you the real deal, and they're getting on the same side of the table, and they're teaching you how to sell to their organization, and that is a real champion.
Correct. That is perfectly said. If somebody just says, give me your best price, and they won't tell you anything, they don't want you to win that deal. Or they view you as a commodity and they do not view you as a partner. Versus, I've had people say, listen, we have to do creative contracting where I can only sign something if it's sub 50K. So send me something for $49,999 and we're good. Right? We have to split this into 2 contracts so I can sign both of them. Like, if they want you to win, they, like you said, they will teach you how to sell to their org.
Bingo. Kristen, this has been a phenomenal episode, but the clock is ticking and we are running out of time, so we got to move to the final question, which is, we've talked about a lot of really great things salespeople should be doing. Now I got to ask you about a shouldn't. And so the last question is, what's one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
So it's the opposite of selling between. It is something that slows momentum down. And I would say they need to stop sending any follow-up communication that does not add value. And my litmus test for that in my mind is, would they pay to know this? Does it have an insight? Does it teach them something about how to evaluate offerings in this space? Is it something they would pay to know? If it is not, I should not be sending it.
Kristen, thank you for an amazing episode. Everyone, hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Cheers. All right, Nick, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Kristen. Connor, what do you have for your 2?
So first, as you think about the things that folks on different altitudes of the power line care about, end users care about making their day-to-day job easier. Managers care about helping their team execute against something that improves a metric upon which they are measured. Executives care about things that will help them accomplish goals or mitigate risk. When you are selling to those different types of users, if you sell at the wrong mismatch of power and whatever the heck you say or share, it's like you shouldn't have sent anything in the first place. So that's number 1. Number 2 is when you share collateral, content, best practices, etc. in between these meetings, if you're just sending links to your own company's case studies, there's no credibility there. Your customer knows your marketing team put together something to make you look really, really good. Instead, Kristen recommended you pull from third-party sources, places like Gartner, McKinsey, Forbes, HBR, or industry-specific stuff. I used the International Legal Technology Association as an example for when I sold to law firms. So go into those different resources and look stuff up. I promise if you use Google or ChatGPT, you'll be able to find collateral that your buyers actually respect that will help you sell. Quick Google search will help you out a lot.
Number 3, early in your sales cycle, you want to send your prospect things that convince them or amplify the problem and make it seem worth solving. So for example, you might talk about attrition rates if you are selling a HR solution, or you might talk about challenges breaking into enterprise accounts if you are trying to sell sales tech. But then number 4, later in your sales cycle, you want to give your prospect things that make the implementation process easy. Kristen talked about sending people a book on change management once they got to the later parts of the sales cycle, and that makes them start to realize, oh, okay, this person's actually trying to help me roll this thing out the right way. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out?
Yeah, one of the themes that we talked about in this episode was the idea of mitigating risk towards the end of the sales cycle. And it actually made me think a lot about one of the sessions that we did with Matt Dixon, who wrote The Jolt Effect, where he talks about one of the big reasons that buyers don't make decisions is because of what he calls FOMO, fear of messing up. When your buyer makes a big purchase, they buy your thing, they're putting their neck on the line. And if it doesn't go well, they could lose their job. And I don't think many salespeople actually realize that's a real risk that your buyer takes when they sign a contract from you. And in that Tactic Teardown episode we did, Armand, Matt talks about some of the ways that we can quell some of our buyers' concerns and mitigate risk to help our deal actually go through. I'll put a link in the show notes so folks can access that session. That one helped me a lot as it related to overcoming buyer indecision. Folks, thanks for listening, and we will see you next week on the show.